Habari za jioni ndugu wawekezaji. Kumradhi kwa kuchelewa kidogo, tulikuwa tunaweka mambo sawa ya mitambo. Karibuni sana, ni Ijumaa nyingine tena kama kawaida. Tuko hapa tukiangalia jinsi ambavyo soko lilivyoenda. I believe the presentation inaonekana vizuri kabisa. Tuko na Bwana Imani, Ami na Ibra kama kawaida. Na upande wa kwanza kabisa tutakuwa tunaangalia kwamba wiki hii mambo yameperform vipi? Wiki ya 35 ya mwaka 2025 mambo yameendaje kwa namna moja au nyingine. Lakini baada ya hapo kutakuwa a very good presentation. I believe watu wengi ambao wanatufuatilia wameweza kuona kabisa kwamba soko limechangamka kwa namna moja au nyingine, na watu wengi wanauliza, hizi bei na uchangamfu tunaoona ni sawa si sawa? Ni sustainable sio sustainable? Na hivyo basi tuko upande wa pili tutakuwa tunaliongelea soko kwa ujumla, like what was the market before the new rules, what is the market sasa hivi, na nini kitatokea, na wewe kama mwekezaji nini cha kunote kwa kiasi kikubwa. Tupe kama dakika 2 wakati tunaweka mitambo sawa, alafu tutarudi kwanza weekly wrap yetu kwa haraka kidogo. Asanteni sana, karibuni sana. Asanteni na samahani kwa kusubiri. Wiki ya 35 ya mwaka 2025 we had a very good and successful week. I believe ndugu wawekezaji mnaweza mkaona hapo tuna greens za kutosha kabisa. Turnover imeweza kuongezeka mpaka 17 billion toka 9 billion last week, lakini pia hata number of share traded zimeweza kuongezeka to 12 million from 7 million last week. Market cap na yenyewe imeongezeka kidogo by 0.5%, na pia domestic capitalization imeongezeka kwa 0.6%. na kwa yule ambao ana shauku kubwa kujua ni nini kimesababisha haya mambo yote, soon unaweza utagundua nini kimesababisha haya mambo yote. So all share index ya Dar es Salaam pia imeweza kuongezeka by 0.5%. Tanzania share index imeweza kuongezeka by 0.6%. Industrialized ndio pekee yake ambayo imeyumba kidogo kwa namna moja au nyingine, lakini bank finance and investment imeongezeka pia, na commercial service index na zenyewe zimeongezeka pia. Sasa all of these greens katika hizi wiki zimesababishwa na nini? Kwenye upande wa turnover kwanza, hiyo turnover unayoiona hapo, CRDB imeweza kudominate by 59%. Ikifuatiwa na NMB ambayo yeye amepokea 19.9%. Ukitoka hapo unakuja counter ya KCB ambayo imeweza kuwa na turnover 9.6%. na kwa namna moja au nyingine pia tumeweza kuona activities kwenye hizi counters ambazo zimekuwa cross listed, especially KCB imeanza kuwa ina activities, na mara nyingi unakuta kwenye soko inalala katika demand side, kwamba unakuta kuna watu ambao wanataka kununua hii counter. Jubilee Holdings ime-contribute 3.7%, DSE yenyewe ime-contribute 1.8%, na hizi counters zingine zilizobaki zimeweza kugawana hiyo 5.5%. Kwa ujumla wake hiyo 17.8 billion kwa namna moja au nyingine hapo ndipo jigawanya, na tumeweza kuona activities nyingi sana kwenye counter ya CRDB. Najua last week tulikuwa tunaona counter ikishuka kwa kasi, na naamini kuna watu wengi walikuwa wamekaa mkao wakitaka kununua, lakini wanajaribu kuangalia bei inaenda kuangukia wapi mpaka mwisho. Lakini baada ya kuanza kuonekana tu kwamba wauzaji wamepungua, wanunuzi wapo, counter ikaanza kukimbia kidogo, na hapo ndo tumeona activities nyingi za CRDB zikitokea. Lakini pia NMB amekuwa akionyesha a very steady performance. imekuwa ni counter ambayo kwa muda mrefu sana over the last 2 weeks inalala na demand, na bei imekuwa inaongezeka, na hata market cap imeweza kufika 4.2 trillion wiki hii. Kwa hiyo hizi ndio counter ambazo zimeweza kucontribute kwa kiwango kikubwa sana kwenye hiyo turnover ya 17.8 billion ambayo tumeweza kuiona katika wiki hii husika. Sasa nani kapata nani kapoteza? Hapa ndo tunaweza kuona nani kapata nani kapoteza. Aliongoza kabisa kwa kupata wiki hii ni Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange at 10.78%. Na hapa niwape pongezi zao Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange, na hata hii session ya leo inaweza ikadadavua zaidi kwa nini tunaona hiyo 10.78%. The market has been very vibrant. Activities zimekuwa ni nyingi. Tunaona kuna brokers wanakuja na exchange traded fund, tunaona kuna brokers wanakuja na index fund, tumeona turnover zinaongezeka from time to time, lakini pia tumeona kabisa kwamba wawekezaji wenyewe wanapenda hili soko, wanazidi kuongezeka na watu wanazidi kulipenda soko. Na hivi vitu vyote tunapoviongelea hapo vinaongeza mapato ya Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange. Tulikuwa nafanya highlight ya Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange kama mwezi wa 7 vile, na tukaweza kuielezea kabisa kwamba paka mwezi wa 6 mwaka jana ilikuwa ishafikia turnover ya mwaka jana mzima. Paka mwezi wa 6 mwaka huu alikuwa ishaweza kufikia turnover ya mwaka jana mzima. So you can imagine kama kampuni unaweza kufikia mauzo yako mwaka jana mzima ndani ya nusu mwaka, na bado ndo kwanza sheria mpya zilikuwa zinaingia, ndo kwanza activities zinaongezeka. You can imagine the bottom line ambayo tuna expect kwa mwaka huu husika. Hivyo basi ndugu wawekezaji wameamua kunyakua hii share mapema sana, na this week imeweza kugusa paka 5960. Very big number here. Nakumbuka nilipokuwa naingia sokoni DSE IPO 500 mpaka 1800 pale, ilikuwa inaonekana ni very big gain. Sasa naamini yule mtu aliyeshikilia hii counter tokea IPO mpaka leo atakuwa na furaha kwa hali ya furaha kubwa kidogo. Anayefuata kwenye gain ni DCB. DCB imekuwa ni small counter, lakini imekuwa ikileta maajabu kidogo sokoni. Tumeona kabisa kwamba bei imekuwa ikipanda na kumekuwa na demand hapa na pale, lakini kwa namna moja au nyingine pia wale ambao walinunua kwa 135, 115 tumeona pia wakitake profit. Kwa hiyo unakuta kuna muda kwamba kuna demand kubwa sana sokoni, kuna muda unakuwa na supply kubwa sana sokoni. Lakini vile all in all, yule ambaye aliweza kuwa na DCB, alifungua wiki akiwa na DCB, angeuza leo unakuta kabisa kama ameweza kutengeneza 7.1% ndani ya wiki hii moja tu. Counter inayofuata hapo kwa kuingia kwa kugain ni TOL katika bei katika percent ya 2.65%. Tumeweza kuona hii counter ilifika hadi 1000 pale. Sasa watu walikuwa wanajaribu kufanya supply kwa 1000 na imekuwa ikicheza hapo kati ya 910, 900, 950 na kwa hiyo imeweza kugain by at 2.65%. Lakini pia precision counter ambao watu wengi walikuwa hawawezi kuitarajia sana, lakini imegain at 2.3%. na hii ndio ile ideology ambayo tulikuwa tunaiongelea sana last week kwamba imefika muda baadhi ya investors wanatamani kununua zile hisa ambazo ni za bei rahisi kidogo, wakitarajia kwamba siku zikija ku unlock zikafika katika double, katika hizi digits 3-4 wanaweza kutengeneza faida kubwa. Hivyo basi tunaona pia kuna activities kadhaa kwenye counter kama DCB na Precision Air. Mtu ambaye amelose kidogo ni Nico wiki hii ambao tulifunga inakuja kwa 1850, lakini hapa investor inabidi atilie maanani kwamba though bei yake ilikuwa anafunga last week ilikuwa kwenye 1910, alishuka sana hapo katikati. Mwanzoni mwa wiki pale alishuka mpaka 1300, lakini yapotangaza tu gawio bei imerudi mpaka leo tunafunga 1850. And those are the opportunities ambazo market inazipresent sasa hivi, na those are the opportunities ambazo tutakuwa naziongelea kwa undani sasa hivi. Imagine counter inatoka 1910 inashuka mpaka 1400, 1350, halafu inarudi 1850. You can imagine mtu ambaye alinunua kwa 1350 leo bei iko 1850 ametengeneza shilingi ngapi ndani ya wiki hii husika. Lakini pia unge imagine yule ambaye alikimbia kuuza kwa 1400 leo hii anajuta kiasi gani baada ya ile gawio la shilingi 70 aliyotangaza Nico kutangazwa siku ile. Na tulikuwa sokoni tuliona kabisa kwamba mabadiliko yalikuwa ni makubwa ghafla. Toka counter kwamba kuwa na sellers hamna buyers, paka kuwa na buyers hamna sellers, paka bei kuruka paka hapa ilikuweza kufika siku ya leo. Lakini pia TPCC amekuwa kished kidogo hii counter yake. Naona leo tumefunga kwenye 5500 na kuna hapo katikati kuna muda alikuwa na demand kwenye 4900 around hizo levels. Na kwa namna moja au nyingine naamini kabisa kwamba kuna baadhi ya wawekezaji wako very skeptical na hii counter wakiangalia kwamba kuna ile wakiogopa kwamba focus inaweza ikaenda zaidi kwenye Tanga Cement kuliko Twiga Cement, na ndio maana tumeona ikished, but it's a very strong company and it's more or less kwenye maturity. Kwa hiyo hata kama bei inavyoshuka, au bei inashuka kidogo afu inarudi pale pale, inashuka kidogo inarudi pale pale. Tumeziona hizo activities sana kwamba inatoka 6,000 inashuka 5,500 inakuja hadi 4,000 alafu inarudi 5,500. It's like the market is still trying to discover the real price of TPCC. And the best part about this stock ni moja ya stock ambayo ni very good dividend payer. Kwa hiyo kwa wale ambao ni wanapenda dividend, unakuta kabisa kwamba hawaoni shida kununua account kwa sababu wanajua gawio lao litakuwa ni nzuri kwa namna moja au nyingine. Kwenye upande wa nani aliuza na nani alinunua wiki hii, tunaona kwa kiasi kikubwa sana kwamba local investors wanazidi kutufurahisha, kwamba buyers wakubwa sana ni foreign investors, ni local investors. Kumradhi, local investors wameweza kununua 99.31%, wakati foreign ameweza kununua only 0.69%. Upande wa kuuza pia local pia bado wana dominate market, ambao unakuta ni 72.39%, wakati foreign investor wameuza 27.61%. Na hii imekuwa ni kitu ambacho kinaendelea kutokea kwa muda mrefu kidogo, kwamba locals wana dominate the market, foreign wengi wanakuta na exit, lakini bado locals wana uwezo wa kuabsorb whatever the foreigners wanapotoka. Na kwa hali halisi ya soko hii inaweza ikawa a very good factor kwa namna moja, kwamba unakuta hizi geopolitics za nchi zinaanza zisitushake sana, kwa sababu kama hawa local wanaweza dominate market na wanaiamini market yao, na wanaweza wakafanya turnovers kubwa na wakafanya soko kama linapoendelea kuwa vibrant sasa hivi, inasaidia sana, kwa sababu kwa hali ya kawaida hawa foreigners masoko yao yakianza kutoa returns nzuri, wanatokaga sana sana nyama masoko madogo na masoko yao ambayo yako more matured, wakijua kabisa kwamba risk inakuwa ni ndogo kidogo. Sasa pale wanapotoka haya masoko yetu madogo, mara nyingi yanapata shake kubwa, kwamba ukiona foreigner ana sell, unakuta kabisa kwamba kuna shake, kwa sababu kunakuwa na supply kubwa sokoni na demand inakuwa hamna. Sasa kwa Tanzania it has been somehow vice versa, kwa sababu ndio muda ambao pia Watanzania wameamka kwa namna moja au nyingine sokoni, na wanaamua sasa wanaweza kuabsorb kwamba huyu anatoka kweli, kaona kuna fursa nyingine katika nchi nyingine, anauza ile share baada ya kuwa supply kubwa demand ndogo, anakujikuta kabisa demand bado ni kubwa kuliko ile supply ambayo foreigner anatuletea sokoni. Hivyo basi tunaweza tukaabsorb kile anachokiuza na bado bei zikaendelea kupanda vizuri. And we have seen this, and hapa natoa pongezi la dhati kabisa kwa ndugu wawekezaji ambao wanazidi kuongezeka na wanazidi kuliamini soko letu kila siku. Upande wa wale ambao hatupendi risk kabisa, upande wa hati fungani ambao tunajua kabisa kwamba return yetu inakuja katika level gani, wiki hii tumerekodi turnover of 58 billion upande wa government bonds, lakini pia upande wa corporate bonds tumeweza kurekodi turnover of 12.5 million. Upande wa government bonds ukiangalia it's a bit less from the previous week, lakini naamini kabisa pia kwamba wale wengi ambao walijikuta wameshanunua hizi bonds hata sasa hivi wanaweza wakataka kwa hatapenda sana kuziuza kutokana na hali ya riba zinavyozidi kuendelea. Tumeona tangazo leo kwamba mnada wa miaka 20 ambao utafanyika wiki ijayo, mnada mpya kabisa, riba ni 14% kamili. Wakati ya miaka 25 ilikuwa ni 15% kamili. Na kwa bahati mbaya sijajua ni nini, lakini kuna psychological effect kwamba watu wengi wakiendaga wanakuja wanapenda hizo long term kwa sababu ya 15%. Sasa hapo na unavyoona kabisa kwamba 20 years zinatoa 14%, na mimi hata wale ambao walikuwa wanataka kuuza bondi zao wanaanza kuwa na mashaka ya kuuza, kwa sababu anajua nikitaka kuja kununua tena sitapata tena ile 15 ambayo nimeizoea, narudi kwenye 14%. Kwa hiyo turnover imekuwa at 58 billion. Bond ilo dominate kuuza katika upande wa government bonds ilikuwa ni 15 years, na hapa ni kitu cha kawaida ambacho tunakinaga sokoni kwamba wiki baada ya mnada unakuta ile bond ambayo imetoka kwenye mnada ina trade sana. Alipata anataka kuuza tengeneze faida, alikosa kwenye mnada na kuja kwenye secondary market kuinunua hiyo bond, na ndio maana kwa namna moja au nyingine imedominate. Na kwa wale walionunua unaweza ukaona kabisa kwamba wana advantage kwa namna moja au nyingine, kwa sababu one, they are getting 14.5 kwenye 15 years, wakati tunaenda kununua 20 anapata 14 kamili. Lakini pia watu ambao wamenunua 15 ya last auction, kuponi yao kwanza iko hapo karibuni tu mwezi wa 9, na maana ilikuwa na accrue ya shilingi 6. Kwa hiyo unakuta kwa namna moja au nyingine bado hawajalose sana na wanategemea kula hiyo coupon mapema kidogo. Kwa hiyo ni I believe wale ambao wameamua kuingia secondary kuitafuta hiyo bond baada ya kuikosa, baada ya kusubiria mnada huu, sasa hivi wanachekelea kwa namna moja au nyingine, wakiona kabisa kwamba they are going to enjoy coupon of 14.5 instead of 14 na kama ilivyotangazwa siku hii ya leo. Bond pendwa hizi ndefu za miaka mirefu 25 and 20 years bado ziko nyuma kidogo, kwa zimekuwa nyuma kidogo kwa wiki, kwa sababu baada ya 15 ikatrade zaidi 10 years, ambao 10 ndio tuko kwenye 14%. Baada ya hapo 25 na 20 ndio zimegawana, 25 at 11.7%, na 20 at 8.5%. Na hii ndo another kudos to the Bank of Tanzania na wale wote ambao wako Ministry of Finance wanapanga hizi kalenda. Yaani zamani ningekuwa na portray hii duara, lingekuwa more or less kama duara corporate bonds, na hapo tungeona tu ni 25 na 20 ndio zimegawana kama hapo ilivyogawana Samia na NMB. Lakini ukirudi sasa hivi angalau ukiangalia duara la government bonds, unaona kabisa kwamba kuna activity katika kila 10 year. Sio kwamba tu ukifika mnada wa yani nafika muda paka mtu paka anasahau mnada wa 10 years, anakusahau mnada wa 15 hangaiki nao, anasubiria 20 and 25. Lakini sasa hivi unaona sasa 15 na dominate, 10 years imetrade zaidi kuko 20 na 25, and it's something very 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 very, yani sio kitu cha kuzoeleka kwenye soko kwa sisi tuliokaa sokoni kwa muda kadhaa. Sio kitu cha kuzoeleka kuona kabisa kwamba hii keki ya trading imegawanywa katika hizi 10 years mbalimbali. Wiki hii pia tulikuwa na mnada wa T-bills. I believe investors wengi hatuwaonaji hapa, tunaona makampuni especially banks zikiparticipate, na katika T-bills pia tumeona kitu cha tofauti kidogo. One, tumeona activity katika kila muda. Siku 35 kuna activity, siku 91 kuna activity, siku 182 kuna activity, siku 364 kuna activity, and it's something ambacho kuna muda tulikimiss kidogo kuona activity katika kila time frame kwenye hizi T-bills. Lakini pia unaweza ukaona pale kuna kwenye weighted average yield. Naomba niweke msisitizo hapo kwenye weighted average yield kwamba tumeona kuna katofauti kidogo kwa sababu tulikuwa tushazoea kwamba ile mwaka mmoja inakuwa na yield kubwa kuliko zote, lakini unaona sasa 91 days 182 days imeweza kuwa na yield kubwa kuliko mtu aliyochukua kwa mwaka mzima, na hii ni inaweza pia ikaendelea kuboost activities katika hizi bond, katika hizi T-bills za muda mfupi, sasa siku 182 na siku 91. Na naamini kabisa kwamba baada ya hivi natamani the next auction ya T-bills tuje na display hapa. I believe tutaona activities zinazidi kuongezeka sana kwenye upande huu wa miaka kwa siku 182 na siku 91. Hapo tunaona kama unavyoweza kuona kwa haraka haraka, total amount traded ilikuwa 136 billion kwenye 364 days, only 14 billion kwenye upande kwenye 182 days, and only 11 billion kwenye 91 days. Sasa kwa hizi yield ambazo tunaziona hapa, ambao hata 91 days na 182 days na return kubwa kuliko 364 days, naamini kabisa mnada ujao wa T-bills unaweza kukuta hii 136 billion ambayo imekaa hapo mwishoni ikawa spread evenly over hizi 10 years zingine, au ika spread zaidi katika hizi 10 years zingine. Na I believe kabisa kwamba benki kuu na serikali kwa ujumla wanajaribu kuangalia kwamba wanakopa katika rate gani, lakini pia hizi siku zingine pia na activity, kwa sababu kwa wale wanaofanya pricing hizi activity katika hizi siku 35, siku 91, siku 182 pia ni muhimu sana kwenye watu wanaofanya baizi ya pricing katika hizi taasisi zetu za kifedha. Kwa hiyo ndio matokeo kwa ufupi sana. Kwa bahati nzuri au mbaya, today it was a one man show kwenye weekly wrap, lakini Ami alikuwa na maneno mengi sana ya kusema akiangalia soko katika level ya kwamba angalau wiki hii tuna ukijani kote, lakini pia counter yake pendwa DSE iko katika second gainer. Labda nikukaribishe Ami, unajua wasikilizaji wamenisikiliza mimi tu mwanzo mwisho, labda nikukaribishe sasa utupe na vyako kidogo kabla hatujatoka katika hii segment. How do you see this week?
Kwa kweli this week was ilikuwa ina activity. I would say mwanzoni mwa wiki tuliona kama CRDB ile reversal kama inataka kuisha hivi, and then kukawa kuna strong momentum ya kununua around kama Jumanne Jumatano, lakini tunaona the reversal continued. Umeona, so was DCB ilikuwa slow down kidogo, nakumbuka mpaka ika demand sokoni ama supply ikashuka mpaka watu wakawa willing kusell hadi 255, lakini ghafla the week ended imeweza kurally back mpaka ikihit another at least for now an all time high ya hii 52 weeks ambapo tunaona ikitrade around shilingi 300. So I would say ile volatility bado tunaendelea kuiona, counters kama NMB tunaona zinaendelea kutembea. What does it say? It says kwamba people are still finding these stocks exciting. Tumeona wiki hii ni Paul akitangaza gawio na la shilingi 70 ambapo most expected it to be around that particular segment ama naweza kusema katika bei hiyo. Na with that being said, counter hii ambayo ilikuwa na yenyewe na drop ilifika hadi around 1390, tumeona imebounce back mpaka 1800, na hii ilikuwa within a few hours baada ya gawio kutangazwa. So what I'm seeing also ni kwamba information is being absorbed very fast. Ikitokea information watu wana react. Technology, financial literacy vikikutana pamoja na changes in trading rules, basi that is volatility, and with volatility money is being made. So asante Ritiko, those are my options.
Yeah, kama tulikuwa tuna discuss juzi hapa, naamini kuna baadhi ya waajiri wanapata shida sana sasa hivi kwa sababu watu wanalichungulia soko masaa 24. Ukiangalia jinsi ambavyo bei ya CRDB iligeuka siku ile 1150 mpaka 1270, it was very abrupt. Na moja ya watu ambao wametrade sana wiki hii ni Imani. Hebu Imani tuambie kidogo tuambie kidogo, what do you say about this volatility? Na counter gani ilikuwa pendwa sana kwako? Kwa sababu wiki hii naona kama kulikuwa kuna opportunities nyingi.
Asante Litiko. Oda zangu sikupi wewe, ndaanza kuzitrade mwenyewe zote sasa hivi. Naona unakuja kuniweka hewani. But this week was very interesting. We saw what happened in CRDB. In just a matter of hours, the price changed from 1150 to 1260. That is about 150 shillings. Kwa hiyo change peke yake tu, kuna watu ambao washatengeneza ranzo ambao walifanya timing mapema asubuhi wakaingia kwenye 1150 and then ikabadilika all of a sudden. That was very interesting. Kwa hiyo volatility tunaona inahamasisha watu kuwekeza, kwa sababu hiyo ndio topic leo tunayoiangalia hapa, hii volatility, how the market was hitting, how the prices have moved since the mid year, since June. I believe there are people who made money during just this week. They made a lot of money. I'm not one of them. I'm not one of them, but but people made money. My colleagues, money will come.
Shukran sana Imani. Kuna mzee wa halal kabla tujahamia kwenye overheating na yeye Ibra, trigger has been the lowest wiki hii pale katika watu ambao wamelose a lot. But moja account ambayo iko kwenye halal product hebu tuambie, najua hii account, unajua TBL last week kuongea kabisa. Sasa leo hebu tuangalie, where do you see trigger going? Tumefunga 5500 leo, where do you see it going?
My personal opinion kwamba trigger is like a baby pale kwenye stock market, kwa sababu yuko pale Tegeta Wazo ana supply cement Dar es Salaam nzima, tunajua it's on a premium. Naamini kwamba it will return to its good old days. Na mimi binafsi unajua kabisa na mzigo wangu pale ninaushikilia kwa nguvu nyingi sana, sababu najua unaweza ukarudi.
Na Tanga haikutishi.
Kabla sena kwenye Tanga tunajua trigger they were boasting a fantastic dividend yield. Ile dividend yao ya 600 tumeshakula, tumefurahi. Tunadhani kwamba hopefully kuanzia mwakani inaweza ikapanda ikawa juu ya hapo. Kwa kweli trigger, you can hold on to it. Those are just my personal thoughts.
Yeah, nakubali kabisa Ibra, ni personal thoughts, lakini na maswali mawili tu ya mwisho kabla tuanze presentation. One, move ya Tanga ikutishi kabisa kwamba labda focus inaweza ikahamia upande wa pili. Lakini pili, earning per share na hiyo dividend ya shilingi 600, how long can you sustain? Even more kama unaongea kugrow hiyo dividend toka 600 kwenda zaidi. How long?
Well, Tanga, I think it's upcoming. Na wale ambao wanadhani kwamba they can speculate and make good money from Tanga, I think it's a very good counter. So it's one, yani nakubaliana nawe kabisa kwamba watu wanaweza wakaiangalia Tanga kwa ukaribu zaidi, na we have seen that hata kwenye movement in price. Kipindi bado inatengeneza negative equity kwa sababu they are not very profitable or they are making losses, lakini bado bei ilikuwa on the positive side, na bado walivyo release their quarter 2 results they showed some profit, na bei yake pia imeweza ku rally up. tunajua wanafanya rights issue, so kwa kweli hopefully it's gonna come up. Kwenye upande wa Trigger, you know, with Trigger they have a very clean balance sheet, wana lots of cash, no debt, and the owners they're the same ones for Trigger and Tanga as well. I still go back to their positioning. Yani imagine kampuni ya sementi wamekaa pale Tegeta, Wazo pale, Dar es Salaam, mwendo kasi, miradi yote watu wanavyojenga left, right and center, and we know Dar es Salaam is the business hub of the country. Kwa kweli I'm very happy with Trigger. That's just my personal opinion. Tuone mwaka huu watafanyaje. Nilikuwepo kwenye EGM yao a few months ago, walisema kwamba they are implementing alternative sources of energy, wanapunguza gharama za umeme na other sources of energy. Gharama zitapungua nadhani by more than 50%. Yale yalikuwa sio maneno yangu, ni maneno ambayo yalitamka kwenye AGM. Kwa hiyo nadhani hiyo project ilikuwa inatakiwa at least ikamilike na ianze operational by September this year. We hope kwamba by December all the results of FY 2025 zitakuwa ni nzuri zaidi. They will be more profitable if all of this goes on well. So I'm still putting my hopes on Trigger.
Yeah. Tukimpa muda Ibra hapa anaweza akaendelea kuongea hiyo Trigger mpaka session ikaisha, wakati tuna topic nzuri kabisa hapa, overheating or repricing on DSE. Kwa huyo ndo Ibra akitetea counter yake pendwa kabisa, and I believe kwa ambao wanatufuatilia waishaanza kujua counter pendwa za kila mmoja katika hii eneo, katika hii congregation ya hii na hawa presenters. Kwa hiyo asante sana. Sasa tunarudi kwenye topic yetu ya leo, overheating or repricing on Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange. Mada nzuri kabisa. Tumeona activities zinazoendelea sokoni, tumeona how the market is moving, tumeona volatility kubwa ambayo huko nyuma tulikuwa hatuioni. Kwa hiyo ndugu msikilizaji, karibu sana uwe na sisi katika hii presentation. Naona Imani ameshakaa mkao wa kupresent. Kama una swali lolote katika vitu ambavyo tumeshaviongea au tutaenda kuviongea, kindly drop them kwenye chat, na tukishamaliza presentation tutazipitia. Lakini pia as Imani is speaking, ukiwa na swali lolote lile, as the guest atumalika akiwa anaongea kwa swali lolote lile, kindly nyosha mkono ili tuweze kujua wa kwanza, wa pili, wa tatu, alafu tutatoa kama muda utaturuhusu, tutatoa maswali mawili au matatu ya upendeleo kwa ambao wanaweza wakauliza wa kuongea, then we can move forward from there. Imani, overheating or repricing, unatuambia your take sasa hivi au unatuambia mwishoni?
Ngoja tupitie kwanza. Tuangalie statistics, tuangalie number, tuangalie what has conspired in the market, alafu labda mwishoni tutarudisha hili swali kwa umma na kwa mgeni wetu. Na kwa sababu ya discussion ya leo na mgeni, so I think most of the presentation nitatumia Kiingereza kwa sababu hii tuwe pamoja na our guest tuliyemwalika. So from now nitachomeka neno moja la Kiswahili pale ambapo unajua Kiingereza ni lugha ya meli. Kwa hiyo nitachomeka neno moja la Kiswahili tuwe pamoja. So today what we are looking at, as the name, the title says, we have seen a lot of activities on DSE. We have seen a lot of activities in equities, but most of it we have seen financial awareness grow. We have seen what has been going on in collective investment schemes. We have seen the auctions, BOT auctions. We have seen how the prices have gone up at DSE and the turnover as well. We're going to see most of it here. So there's been a question along these lines. There's been a question considering all of this development. There's been a question: are we in a bubble? Is the market overheating? Or maybe it's just the new normal that we are getting into. Maybe the market is repricing these equities. Maybe there are opportunities that people see in these stocks and they're just taking advantage of these opportunities, and this is the new normal that we are getting into. That has triggered our discussion today. That has triggered us to take this data, look at it, and look at this presentation, and invite our good friend Tim Styos, who is with us today. I would like to welcome him to just introduce himself and, you know, say where he's from. Tim,
I've been unmute.
Yes. Hi.
Tim.
I've been able to unmute. Yeah, sure. Thanks for inviting me along. It's been a while since I did one of these presentations in public. I think if you recall, a few years ago, I was urging people to look at the markets, and I'm glad that finally a lot of people are getting into the market, and we're seeing some action, and that the exchange has made some positive changes that obviously have helped contribute to that. So it's good to see the capital markets developing here, and I'm glad that people are able to participate. For those who don't know me, I am based here in Dar es Salaam. I was actually born here many years ago, but I grew up in Australia, and I've been back living here since 2020. I run an investment fund which is called African Lions Fund. It invests actually all over Africa in frontier markets, so it's a Pan-African fund, Sub-Saharan Africa, ex-South Africa. But Tanzania has been one of our largest markets to be involved in since the inception of the fund. It's still about equal with Kenya, and then we have some exposure also to other markets around the place, about 30% or 32% each in Kenya and Tanzania at the moment, and then Nigeria is a very long distant third at about 13% of our fund, and various other markets as well. So I've been following the market here since 2018, I think it was, Imani. I first met you and made the move across here to work on the fund full time, as I said, almost 5 years ago. So it's the first time I'm seeing this sort of bullish mood in the market. I know that there was a previous cycle, probably ended in 2019, something like that. Well, you can correct me on that. I wasn't around. When I came, the market was very subdued. The banking sector was flat on its back. There'd been some shocks, but that was actually an ideal time to start investing, as it turned out, for me. And I have that kind of mentality that I like to go and invest in places that are not popular when they're cheap. But we can discuss, as you have in your presentation, whether things are overheating or not. And I'll save my comments on that until you get into your presentation. Thanks very much.
I remember you made the decision to invest in Tanzania within 48 hours since you first saw the opportunities that were in Tanzania. Just in 48 hours, and you made your first trip here and decided to relocate. So that was very interesting.
Yes. I like bargains. So back in 2018, the exchange was very subdued, and things were cheap. And the two counters that I started with personally for my own portfolio were Trigger Cement, which I heard you still obviously like, your team. And then I also had an investment in Nickel, but that was mainly because I liked NMB Bank, and it was a cheap way of getting exposure to NMB Bank, and it still is. So those were the two that I started with, and since then, I've invested in plenty more.
So much. So Tim will be part of the discussion. We'll just have a quick presentation of what we see in the market right now, the recent developments, and how the market has evolved. For some numbers, we'll look at as back as maybe 2020 or 2018, and for some, we'll just look as back as 2022. And for some numbers, we'll look as back as 2015. It just depends with the core message. So the presentation is already displayed. Let's just go through it, and then we'll welcome Tim back for a discussion a bit later, for questions from the team here, as well as from the audience who are listeners to this presentation. So, looking at the market in the recent development of the market, when you look at the Tanzania Share Index, and the Tanzania Share Index represents the price movement or market capitalization movement of domestic listed counters. We know that the market has about 28 listed equities, but only 22 are from the domestic market, and 6 companies are cross-listed from Nairobi. That is that they are primarily listed in Nairobi and that they are secondarily listed here because they have some business here. For instance, East African Breweries is listed in Nairobi and cross-listed in Tanzania because they have a subsidiary here called CRDB Breweries. National Media Group owns the Citizen and Mwananchi. We have Jubilee Holdings, which owns Jubilee Insurance. And then like Kenya Airways is also cross-listed here because of activities, and also they are one of the largest shareholders of Precision Air. So because of that, some counters are listed primarily in other markets and then cross-listed here. So the TSI focuses on domestic counters because domestic counters are the counters that are most bought by domestic investors. And as we will see later, majority of this rally is driven by domestic investors. So since 2022, you see the Tanzania Share Index, which is the index that represents the movement of domestic market capitalization, rose from barely above 3,500 to 5,500. That is 2,000 points just in a matter of 3 years. And if you look at this this graph, you see the point between April 2025 and August 2025. These 4 months, the graph is the steepest, let alone for the period between January and June 2022. But between April 2025 and August 2025, the graph is the steepest. And if we remember what happened in January to June 2022, the prices of bonds went to the highest point in history. For instance, the 25 years bond, which was priced at had a coupon rate of 15.95, went to 140 shillings, bringing the yield down to about 11%. And we see the graph is also steep during this period. And during this period, as well as we will see for bond yields, they are a bit on a nosedive, as we have seen the coupon, the 20 years bond was auction for next week was just announced, and the coupon rate is 14%. It's lower than the 15. They just reopened 15 years bond, which was at 14.5. So, and we know that right now the central bank sets coupon rates determined by market, what's going on in the market. So the central bank watched the market and decided that the 20 years is fairly priced at 14% as a coupon rate. So that says something. That similarity between January to June 2022 and April to August 2025 in bond prices can also be seen in the equity prices. Equity prices have rose between these two times. But overall, we see the market has been appreciating, has been bullish during this time. We just see a steeper slope, upward slope, between April 2025 and August 2025. And for the table on the left side, we shared this table. I think we presented this in the half-year results. In the half-year results, and you can see how some counters have performed significantly. You know, any appreciation above 100%, that means the price doubled during this time. So this is between January 2025 and August 2025, and most of these counters, the top 7 counters, the prices doubled. But we also see some significant returns between DCB, this is 96%, NMB 52%, Trigger Cement, Toll Gases. And just for context, Toll Gases hasn't paid dividends, but you can see the price has gone up by 37%. Tanga Cement hasn't paid dividends, and Tanga Cement, the appreciation of Tanga Cement began in early 2022 because of the announcement that Scansem will be buying out all shareholders of Tanga Cement. And the price, the indicative price by the time was 3,057 shillings, although the price was reviewed downwards to 2,274, if I remember correctly. The rally still persisted, and that transaction happened between Scansem and Afrisam, but then the price was still elevated until they bought the 6.6% from retail investors, while other retail investors will remain with the stock. But the price is still up at 23.70, I believe. So even Tanga Cement, they have a huge debt. They haven't paid dividends, but the price is still rising. And Mwalimu Commercial still, it's loss-making, hasn't paid dividends, but the price has risen by 16%. And then we have some counters that have fallen. So TCC, Vodacom, TBL, and Precision Air, the prices went down. But all of these have a case. So for instance, TCC, Vodacom, and TBL, we know the prices were stuck for about 6, 7, maybe 8 years because of the price determination mechanism. The price, we'll see that a bit later, but determining the price a specific number of shares, a specific portion of the issued and paid up capital had to be traded in the market for those shares for the price to change. So for instance, for TCC, you had to trade about 2,500 shares in a day for to consider a price change on the counter. And if the price of TCC was about 16,000, so you can just do the math. We'll see that on a table later. So for TCC, Voda, and TBL, since the change of regulations, price determination mechanism since June, we have seen the prices, the counters now repriced to a more affordable area. And we have seen, for instance, Vodacom and TBL have already been unlocked. Vodacom dropped to about 490, 480, and now it's trading at around 600. So the counter has already reversed its losses. Some of the losses have already been compensated. And for TBL as well, the price has fallen to about 7,600, and we have seen some stability on those prices. We have seen bids and offers on both sides. For Precision Air, I even wondered how, you know, some investors have gotten into this counter because it has negative equity. The counter has negative equity, but then we've seen some developments recently. I believe there was a quarter last year that the airline was profitable. They just bought 2 new airplanes, I think, mid this year. I think this kind of developments have attracted some investors to purchase the shares, and we have seen a repricing now, which has triggered a fall of 45%, but we've seen some demand develop on the counter. But looking at this table, you see that there's been significant price movements in 2025, and majority of this movement has been seen since early June 2025. This is when the majority of this movement has been prudent. So we have looked at 2022 to 2025, and we've looked at year to date, the price movements year to date. But the position that we are in right now, so we have seen the Tanzania share index, and I've said it's about 5,500 right now. So as of yesterday, the index was at 5,424, almost 5,500, as we've seen in the last graph. 5,424. That's the peak we have seen this year, and the peak we have seen for a very long time. The only other peak we have seen is in 2024. And looking at this graph, it paints a picture. It shows with context that we have been here before, for different reasons, but we have been here before. It's not the highest point DSE has gotten, but it's one of the highest. So we haven't gotten to 2014 yet, but it's one of the highest in the last maybe 9-10 years. So what happened in 2014? What happened in 2014 in the same month and building up to that point? I think it was in October, around 14th October. The foreign exchange investment regulations into DSE were changed. So initially, foreign investors were allowed to invest up to 60% of counters, that up to 60% of equity for a counter that is listed, for a company that is listed on DSE. So during that month, that regulation was changed, and they were allowed to invest up to 100% of those of equities listed on DSE. And for that reason, there was a lot of foreign inflows, a significant chunk of foreign inflows, but also speculation from domestic investors expecting a rally because of new foreign investments into Tanzania. That triggered the prices to go up. And as we can see, in 2014, there's a sharp increase in the index. The sharpest maybe we can see in this graph. I don't think there's been another that sharp, significantly sharp rally on the TSI since then. So we get to the highest point in 22nd October 2014, and the price starts to recorrect. And apart from this, in 2015, something that is not captured in this graph, I call 2015 the golden year of DSE, because the total turnover, equity turnover on DSE was 1 trillion shillings, and this has never happened before or after 2015. Because of significant foreign inflows, but also domestic participation increased because people expected that rally to happen. So in 2015, business on DSE was significantly high. and that is never repeated. And when I say it has never repeated, we have had significant one-off transactions in 2019 and 2020. That is Mirambo and Vodacom. The transaction was worth, I think, about 490 billion shillings. And in 2020, the Rabobank and Arise transaction of NMB shares was worth around 420 billion shillings. But still, in those years, total market cap, total equity turnover did not get to 1 trillion, equivalent to 2015. And there was not any significant transaction in 2015. And going forward, we have had some in 2023. We have seen Scansem and Afrisam trade Tanga shares, I think worth 115 billion shillings, but still turnover has not gotten to 2015 levels. We see this year a significant increase in equity turnover without any major transaction, but we see a significant increase in market turnover. I think it's gotten to close to 500 billion shillings. That is about double, more than double last year's. Total last year was around 228 billion shillings, but this year it has gotten to, I think, close or more than 500 billion shillings year to date, and we are not at the end of the year yet. So we might see something close to what we have seen in 2015. And again, we see another similarity here. As the index went up significantly to the highest point in history, the turnover significantly went up to the highest point in history. And now, as the index has gone up to maybe the second point in history, and we are still seeing a rally. Turnover as well increased significantly, as I've discussed here earlier. So the one difference between the two, 2014 the rally was triggered by the change in regulations and foreign inflow from the change in regulations. Right now, we also may account some rally to the change in regulations, but right now it's driven by domestic investors. That's the major difference. In 2014, it was foreign investors. We saw a significant flow from foreign investors, and right now we significantly domestic investors, as foreign investors have been on the best side of selling since 2020, since the Ukraine war and the rising of interest rates in developed markets. We saw more foreign inflow than inflow consistently, and market participation was dominant on the domestic side rather than the foreign side, and we'll see that a bit later. So just context, we see that we are not at the highest point in history yet, but we have some months to cover, and we have a whole future to see. Until we get there, we'll get back here and tell you now we are at the highest point in history. And the good thing about an index, it's not altered by just, maybe new listings and things like that. It considers all of that. So when we get to the highest point in history, we know that it's a rally and not a new introduction of shares or maybe something like that. So we know it's a rally, it's the increase in prices. So when we get there, we'll be back here to tell you now the market is at the highest point in history, and that will be a significant milestone for DSE. So as I said, we have seen the prices go up, but also activities have gone up significantly. I've compared the 2025 to 2015, 10 years apart. All of these are election years, but the reasons are change in regulations, but right now it's driven domestically. The other time was driven by foreign investors. Now the total turnover, as I said, activities have gone up. So the turnover, that is equity turnover, that is the value of shares traded in the market, went from an average of 2.1 billion before the change in regulations. That is pre-June, before June this year, the same year. So if we take January to May, the average daily turnover was 2.1 billion. But after June, beginning 3rd of June 2025, the daily average turnover is 4.4 billion. So that is more than double what we saw before the change in trading rules. In terms of volumes, during the same period, went from 1.37 million shares traded on a daily basis, and this is on average, to 3.19, also more than doubled. And number of deals, now number of transactions in the market, And now this shows a significant increase in participation, particularly from retail investors, from individual investors, because there's a limited number of institutions that participate in the market, and the same institutions, they would trade every day. So a significant increase in deals and in transactions would show that it's individual investors who have gotten into the market. Maybe as the number of investors has increased, or maybe the frequency of trading by the same investors has increased. In this case, I think it's both. So the average number of deals, this is the average number of transactions a day, has also doubled during the same time, has also doubled from 759 to 1,448 per day. Now this explains, the increase in activities. Bids to offer ratio. Now this also, I think as the rally went on, the market announced itself. It was a marketing tool by itself because people follow good returns. And when people saw a rally, one, it was educated people, just realized there's an opportunity, but also maybe a fear of missing out. People just hear people keep making money, so they try to get in themselves to get a cake for themselves. So the bid to offer ratio rose from 0.39. 0.39, it means for each one share on offer, there was 0.39 bids for that share. So for each 100 shares on offer, there was 39 shares people want to purchase, but that changed to 2.68. So for each 100 shares on offer, there was 268 shares on bids people wanting to purchase, and this explains the continued rally during this time. And I think what changed is when the trading rules changed, and the prices were a bit more flexible to trade, the prices to change, the prices started to move up, and when the prices move up, people started purchasing more, and this triggered a significant demand to the tune that bids were more than 2 times the offers available in the market. And we have seen for a while a lot of counters have had significant demand and no supply, to the extent that prices now were movement of prices was a bit challenging because there was significant demand and nobody was selling. Everyone wanted to buy. Also, market capitalization grew significantly. Between January and May, we saw the price move up by 9.6, and we'll see later the market up to year to date. The market has gone up by about 22%, but majority of this has been realized beginning June to date. That is 12.5%. So the market has moved up by 12.5% beginning June to end of August. What we are speaking here today. While since January to May, the 5 months period, the market moved up by 9.6%. So the rally was already there, because a movement of the whole market by 9.6% isn't a small thing, considering that there's huge discounters like TBL, TCC, and Vodacom that were completely stagnant. So the movement of the whole market by 9.6%, it means there are counters that have moved by more than 30%. But we see since June to August, the market has moved up by 12.5%. And considering since January to May, TBL, TCC, and Vodacom were stagnant, so there was not any movement. So there was not downward pressure on the total market capital, the market capitalization. But beginning June to August, the price of TBL went down, the price of Vodacom went down, and the price of TCC went down. And the price of TCC went down. And apart as these counters fell, still the total market capitalization went up. And on the right side, we see participation. As I said, this has been significantly driven by domestic investors. We see since 2020, domestic investors have been dominant, while foreign investors have been mostly selling. And before 2020, before COVID, foreign investors were completely dominant of our market, more than 95%. And this data is given by the central bank report, the financial stability report. So we see right now, as we come to 2024, domestic investors have been completely dominant on the purchase side. On the sell side as well, they've been dominant, but not the same as on the purchase side. And in 2025, the numbers that I'm looking here, more than 82% since the beginning of this year, more than 82% has been of purchase of purchases have been by domestic investors, and more than 51% of sales has been by domestic. So domestic investors have been net buyers throughout this period. I said in the beginning, I compared in the beginning that, in 2022 we saw a sharp rally between January and June, and right now we have seen a sharp rally between April and August, and in equities. And during the same time, the prices of bonds went up. Now we look at the 25 years bond. Beginning September last year, we saw the yield, the prices fall a bit between September to November, and then we have seen a sharp drop between November last year to August this year, and this is yields. So we have seen the drop from 15.9% to 14.4%. This is the last, and this is weighted average. So there's been prices higher than this, but this is the weighted average. We've seen from 15.9 to 14.4%. This shows how much there's been a demand for treasury bonds. I remember the last auction, the central bank wanted 264 billion shillings and got 1.2 trillion shillings. I think it's the first time competitive bids crossed the 1 trillion mark. So we see the same thing, that there's significant demand for investments, and this is significantly driven by domestic investors. So in both treasury bonds and equities, it's not happening in equities alone. So it's in both, in all financial markets, and we see the same demand in collective investment schemes as they've grown to reach 3.6 trillion shillings right now. And if we look at back in 2020, there was just 470 billion shillings. So more than 3 trillion shillings have been accumulated, have been mobilized with collective investment schemes in these 5 years. And as I said, it's mostly driven by domestic investors, but in the domestic investors segment as well, it's mostly driven by retail or individual investors. And this can be seen on the right side of this slide. As we see, this is participation in primary auctions at the central bank, primary treasury bonds auctions. In 2020, we saw the commercial banks were dominant at 48% participation. So the amounts that are the bids that get into treasury auctions, 48% of these bids were from commercial banks. The value of these bids were from commercial banks, and individuals accounted for only 7.8% in 2020. But then fast forward into 2024, individual investor segment has grown to 29%. It is the largest investor segment in participation in treasury bonds, and these same guys are now dominant in the equity market as well. So we see this, financial awareness has grown significantly, and individual investors are now dominant of financial markets. So why do we see this? What do we think are the drivers that the market has been acting the way it's acting? What are the drivers that domestic and individual investors are dominant in our market, and what has driven the current rally in equities, but also in treasury bonds? The first, in equities, we've seen a change since the trading rules were changed. We have seen a shift in investor sentiment. We have seen a shift in investor participation and appetite to invest in equities. Why? I said prior to June, the amount needed to change a stock price was significantly higher compared to after June. And right now it needs only 100 shares for counter to consider change in prices, because we can't just take any amount, just one person trading one share. That to trigger a price change would be, that would be significant volatility. So before it was 0.025% of the issued and paid up capital for that company, the total number of shares of that company, and that changed to only 100 shares. So I gave an example for TCC. TCC has a share count of 100 million. So 0.0025% is 2,500 shares. Now that has been lowered to 100 shares for TCC to change the price. So because of this, we have seen some volatility in price determination mechanism, which has attracted the investors to invest more in equities because of the returns that have been gained due to a significant movement in prices. But something else, it's corporate earnings. We have seen solid and, very good corporate earnings announced by companies, given, CRDB saw a profit increase of 26%, NMB saw a profit increase of about 15%. I believe TBL, we did the webinar for TBL last week, and we saw a quarterly increase year to year profit growth of about 500%, year to year on a quarterly basis. So all of these improved corporate earnings are encouraging people to invest more in equities. We have seen DSE significant growth, I think by 50%. Mkombozi Bank has issued dividend for the first time, I think, in 4 years, and we have seen the rally 4 times the price that it was before the announcement of the dividend. Maendeleo Bank, we did webinar here. The banking sector is doing well. Nico and Afriprice, they're all doing well. So this has also been a trigger for significant rise in equity prices, but also increased awareness. We know right now a lot. We see if someone is just close enough to capital markets, you would see a lot of statuses, a lot of things going on. People are posting price movements and developments in the market. We have seen collective investment schemes increase. We have seen innovative financial products increase in the market, but also financial coaches. Financial coaches have been doing an amazing job of teaching people and educating people about capital markets and the investments. And even the central bankers, they established a course just to train these financial coaches and to increase credibility in the message that is sent out there. And that has also, we see that as a catalyst. It has also driven significant activities in capital markets, but also domestic investors, as I've already mentioned. Domestic investors have been dominant in the market. So this awareness has triggered people to invest, but also the government's efforts to improve the business environment. We have seen people, the disposable income grow, and people have money to invest, because even if people are aware of investment but don't have money to invest, that it's inakuwa kazi bure. So all of this have been triggers and drivers to, in our view, to the current rally that we see. So I mentioned about the change in the trading in the price determination mechanism, and the amount required for price to change from 0.0025% to 100 shares. So before the trading rules, this is just a snapshot of the largest counters, but before the trading rules, for NMB, for the price of NMB to change, you needed, in a single day, more than 78 million shillings to trade in that day. And after the change of rules, it needed only 630,000 shillings for the price to change. You see in all counters, there's been a significant drop in the requirement for the price to change. For CRDB, it moved from 51 million shillings to only 79,000 shillings. For Vodacom as well, it moved from 43 million to 77,000 shillings only. And this movement before the price changed to beginning of June. So this has triggered the prices to move more actively, and a bit increased in volatility. And this is the reason that we say the change in trading rules has triggered a significant movement in prices, which has attracted a lot of people to invest in equity markets. So now, although people invest in these markets, people follow earnings, people follow dividends. Now, how are the earnings? Where are the earnings compared to the prices? These are PE ratios derived from Bloomberg, and we see a significant increase in PE ratios. Now, PE ratios have been increasing since 2021. What a PE ratio is the price divided by earnings of that company, of a particular company. And this is the average for all of DSE. So the average in 2021 was 6.7. It means, in a simple language, it would take, for instance, if we in a theoretical world, a company pays all of its profits as dividends, how long would it take for an investor to get back all of the profits, all of the money that they've invested in that company? And in 2021, assuming that you've invested in all of DSE and all of the profits made in companies listed in DSE is paid back as profits to you as an investor. In 2021, it would take 6.7 years. By August 2025, looking at the trailing the trailing earnings since June back to June last year, back to September last year, it will take about 26.6 years. Now, this comprises all of the companies on DSE. Some of them are loss-making, but some of them still have a P ratio of maybe less than 6. For instance, CRDB has a P ratio of, I think, 5 or 6 times. NMB the same, maybe 6 or 7 times. Number of good counters have P ratios less than 10. But there are counters that we have seen, for instance, TBL and TCC a bit. TBL right now is a bit relaxed, but maybe TCC, the price is still high. So the P ratio of TCC is more than 15 times. But the rise in P ratio showcases the significant increase in prices since June this year. And we see in the last 8 months, since December to August, reflecting the prices, the P ratio has also doubled. So the prices have significantly gone up compared to the earnings. So just to get some context, Tanzania from DSE is not unique. It's not a peculiar market. It's not uniquely happening in Tanzania. This shows some movement from across the region, across Africa. And we have seen this movement across Africa. I remember at some point until June, until the end of June, the Malawi market moved up by 100%. The whole of the market, we see ours has moved up, if we look at here, by 22%. And until June, our market moved at 13%, moved up at 13%. We did that in a webinar when we talked about the half-year results. But Malawi was up 100% since the beginning of 2025. Now that shows this is happening across Africa. If we look at here, Kenya has moved up by 34% in local currency and 62% in USD, which means that the Kenyan shilling has performed well against the USD in 2025. And you see Malawi is 55%, Ghana is 56%. Nigeria is 37%. So we see a significant movement of counters across Africa, of markets across Africa, and significant rallies. So what we see in our markets, and we think that is peculiar, Tanzania is just 22% since the beginning of the year. And there are markets that have moved, more than how we have moved. So we see this not as unique, but it's happening across Africa. Now, what we're wondering is what's going on in Africa that we see all of this movement. Investors awakening in Tanzania is not unique. We see investors awakening across Africa. We think the recent geopolitical movements, a stop in aids and grants from developed markets, the recent protectionism policies, that the closure of US aid, and this, we think this has triggered for governments maybe in Africa for policy shifts, for governments to focus more on capital rather than aid and grants, to focus more on project financing, and this has shifted policy to capital markets. We have seen how the Vision 2050 has mentioned the use of capital markets, the use of PPE, and the use of private PPP, and the use of private sector financing to finance government projects and to finance government policies towards a 1 trillion economy. We think this is happening across Africa, and that communication comes with financial awareness, comes with the importance of capital markets into our policies and into our economic growth. So that has triggered across Africa. We see capital markets moving, and this is creating opportunities for investors, for people who are familiar or people who are close to equity markets and to financial markets. It's creating a significant opportunity for people to reap rewards from capital markets. So for those who want to invest, we see opportunities in Tanzania, but as you can see on this table, we see opportunities across Africa. For those who want to invest in all of these, most of these markets, at least the ones that the capital account restrictions of Tanzania allow us to invest into, that is EAC and SADC, just contact us and we'll look at the markets that you want to invest in. We'll look at the foreign exchange risks and areas that make sense for you to invest. But we see that there's significant opportunities across Africa developing with the development of capital markets. And by that would be the end of our presentation. I don't think I've answered the question that this is overheating or repricing. I think maybe we can get into a discussion and determine team. Yeah, we can get into a discussion. When I say team, I don't mean team the guest, I mean the team in here with me. for now. For now, we can get into a discussion and discuss and see if this is repricing. What is the culprit? What is the final message that we are saying? Is it that the market has overheated? Do we expect the market to correct? Or maybe this is the new normal, looking at the treasury yields, where they're going, and looking at the prices. Maybe people are comfortable now with lower returns compared to what they were getting last year or the year before. People accepting as the cost of capital gone up, that people are accepting lower yields, lower returns. Because if the calculation of cost of capital, cost of equity particularly, begins with the yield from treasury bonds. So if yields from treasury bonds have gone down, what does that communicate? Ami, Uchiko, anything you want to add before we invite Tim to paint a color and tell us what he sees and invite questions?
Thank you, Imani, for a very elaborative presentation. I believe you have taken a lot. I don't have much. I'm a bit curious on the counters that are driving up, which are above the 26% PE ratio. And I think investors should be very cautious, because if you're looking at a 26 times PE ratio, then obviously that's an average. Then there are counters which are way above that. And I'm really curious about those counters, and I think investors should take note and start pricing them accordingly. And yeah, that's all. That's my comment on my. That's all I have on my end.
Yeah, for me, I'm just thinking out loud. So I think this will just be. I'll just shoot that question to Tim. You can also meditate on that. Being a value hunter, is there a value to be fetched in this market, or we've already exhausted the value and now it's simply volatility? That's all I have on my end.
Okay, just to add a bit more, honestly, in my opinion, I think it's pointing more towards repricing rather than overheating. Why? Because this rally it just doesn't come out of nowhere. I think we've seen in evidence and in this presentation, the earnings have gone up. Companies are doing very well. They are paying much higher dividends, and even the forecast or the projected earnings are actually on the high side. I just want to refrain from saying that the economy is doing wonderfully, but that is what it seems. And I think the market is also being a mirror or reflecting the activities in the economy. So for me, my opinion is that the evidence, at least for now, it points towards more of repricing rather than overheating. Time will tell what the eventual outcome will be. Those are my 2 cents.
I think you have already taken a stance and you already have a conclusion. Now I would really and it's the second conclusion you're drawing today, and I'm really curious to see if teams will be on your side, because on the Trigger shares, they said, I see you guys, you're still confident with it, and it seems like he was a bit not on your line. I'm now curious to see if he'll be on your line this time. Imani, should we welcome Tim?
Yes. So I've noted that Ibrahim has committed to has took a stance to a second thing this evening, and we will hold him to it. So Tim, karibu, and Tim, as you mentioned, you have you run the African Lions Fund, and we know that African Lions Fund, as you mentioned, invests across Africa. And as I've shown in the presentation, that this movement is not unique to Tanzania, and it's moving across Africa. And in these markets where you invest and you're more experienced in. Now, given your experience in these markets and your experience in Tanzania, you've been here since 2019 or 2020. You have invested a lot here, and you've invested a lot in African markets. What do you think is driving this rally in maybe this year and in recent years? What is driving this rally across African markets? Tim, welcome.
Thank you.
Tim, just
yes,
you come in. Apologies. So maybe I'll just use Swahili for this one. Kwa wasikilizaji wetu, hii ni topic nzuri, na kama mnavyosikia, tungependa pia kupata maoni yenu, na nyie pia mtuambie, je, mnaonaje hii market inavyokwenda? Market inapata moto, ina overheat au inajireprice? Na tunawakaribisha mtumie eneo la chat kuweka maoni yenu, na sisi tujue hata baada ya timu kuweka maoni yake tuweze kujua what is the general sentiment of the investors, pamoja na Q&A section. Tim, please carry on.
Sure. So, it's a combination of factors, and as Imani has said and presented, it's not something unique to Tanzania. Most African markets are doing well this year. Some of them started doing well last year. There has been changes in sentiment. But if we look also at developed markets, the S&P 500 in the US is also near record highs. There was a brief panic back in April when the market sold off very heavily when Trump was first rolling out his proposed tariff policies. And the mood then was very bearish, and people thought that the market would correct heavily throughout the rest of the year and that the bull market was over and so forth. But that's not turned out to be the case. Markets are back at record highs. The tariffs have turned out not to be as big a shock as people had imagined. But, markets move for all sorts of reasons, and it's more of a sentiment thing. I think a lot of people were quite downbeat and sour on African stock markets. Maybe they'd lost a lot of money in the last cycle, and it takes time for people to forget the pain of losing money in the last cycle and get confident enough to come in and go back into the markets. In terms of experienced investors, of course, lots of new investors coming in also helps, but they tend to be later to the party probably than the experienced guys and the guys who have seen it all before. And a lot of those have started to come back also in Kenya, which is a market I look quite deeply at. I'm in a lot of chat groups there, so I monitor the market daily. And, there's just a much more upbeat feeling among investors, and it feeds on itself. Now, in terms of economies, I agree with the comments earlier that the economy is actually doing, very well here. And, there are different sectors and different companies. And, I made the determination that the banks had probably bottomed out in late 2018, early 2019 here in Tanzania. And they've been in an upcycle ever since. It just took people several years to kind of realize that and get confident. But other companies, it took much longer for them to come back. I mean, TBL has been struggling until probably sometime last year. They probably hit bottom, and now they seem to be really hitting their stride. So the market, it doesn't move as one wave. There are different sectors and companies in there that move at different times. But perhaps what we have now is we have most of the companies, businesses starting to do well or doing really well, or in the case of banks, still doing well, even though the cycle is getting quite old. And here in Tanzania, that happened probably over a longer period of time than in some of the other markets where I invest. So Kenya, everyone was very bearish and angry, and there were a lot of downbeat assessments of the market in 2023. The shilling collapsed, and it took a while for that all to wash out. But then last year, the market started bouncing back. People were still skeptical. The old saying in stock markets is that they climb a wall of worry. So that was very much what was happening. But, the strengthening of the Kenyan shilling and the improvement in the economy, even though the politics there are still very noisy and fractured, the economy has actually started doing quite well. And you see it with, record electricity generation. Interest rates have come down. They need to come down further, but it's most of the indicators are pointing in the right direction, even if the mood of the man in the street is still quite downbeat because of the politics. So I think Kenya is a little bit behind Tanzania in the cycle. People are probably going to wake up to the fact that the economy is really not doing that badly, and it'll continue to strengthen over the coming 6, 12, 18 months. Here, I think we're a little bit later in the cycle, but there are still plenty of decent valuations around. I like to say to my investors in my fund that, even though we've seen prices rise significantly, our portfolio is actually not yet expensive because most of the price rises have come as a result of earnings increases. So when you look at the overall level of the DSE index and you say, oh, well, it's got an average PE ratio of 26 times, which is, that's starting to get overheated. But you have to look at that number and break it down. And within that, as you said, there are probably some companies that have very small earnings because they haven't been doing well in the recent years. They're just starting to come out of a very long period of hibernation. But you also have companies that are fairly valued or even still cheaply valued. The big banks are still on 5 to 6 times earnings. You could argue that they're getting a little bit expensive in book value terms, and I noticed some of the questioners have commented on that. But there are banks in developed markets that sell at 4 times book. So is 1.5 times book expensive? Not really, especially when these banks create returns on equity in the mid to high 20s, and there's a long runway for growth. So you can argue that the valuations are still cheap for some of the banks. I would argue that they're probably fairly valued, but I'm in no hurry to sell the banks, and I think they can continue to generate healthy earnings growth simply because of the way that banks' business models are quite leveraged and the returns on equity are quite high. And then you have stocks like TCC, TBL, and also Vodacom, where the data is a little bit misleading because of the fact that these prices were stuck and they've come down. So you see that the stock prices look as though they've been coming down. In actual fact, if you were buying them on the block board, as I have been as an institutional investor, the prices, were even lower, and they've actually come up slightly. So you have this meeting of the onboard price and the block price, which is a great thing, which has happened with, initially it happened with NMB a couple of years ago, then with Vodacom, and recently with TBL. And TCC is the only one that's left really to adjust. Excuse me. But those companies' earnings are also growing very strongly. And as I say, I think they're a little bit later in the cycle than the banks. And a stock like TBL is probably still only on a high single-digit PE if you look at the forward EPS estimates that we have. And the same with TCC. They put out some interim results last week for the first half of the year, and the EPS came in at over 700. And it's not a seasonal business, so it's quite a reasonable assumption to just annualize that number, and you get to, say 1,400 shillings a share. So that puts it on about 10 times earnings based on the price on the main board of the DSE. But the last block trade price was only 6,000, which is quite strange, although that's now quite a stale price from a couple of months ago. So the true price of TCC is probably somewhere, in the 9,000 range, I would have thought. And that still makes it quite a reasonably valued counter at those levels. Also with a dividend likely to be, probably 800, maybe even 900 this year. So even at 9,000, you're probably getting nearly a 10% dividend yield. So I would say you can't make a blanket statement that things are overheating. There are still a lot of counters where earnings more than back the price rises and probably justify further price rises. And if some of these highly valued PE stocks are indeed seeing earnings turn around, then their PEs will also contract. And you see that typically in cyclical industries. So I don't follow the second liners here all that closely, I will admit, because my fund is quite a big fund, and for me to put money to work in a small company is not an optimal use of my time. I've got to stick to the bigger ones. But you may see that there are companies, especially the smaller second line banks, where maybe their earnings were depressed, but now they've really started to come back and they're firing on all cylinders, and the market's bid the share prices up, and the earnings will grow into those prices. Is what I'm saying, I guess. And you have similar behavior in Kenya. The second and third line stocks have also really started to rally there. I think the Nairobi Stock Exchange also recently introduced a new rule that is designed to make trading more active. And they used to have an odd lots board, and you had to trade in round lots on the main board, but they've done away with that rule. I think you can now trade as little as one share, which is quite an innovative thing for them to have done. So you also have a lot more retail interest there. And, I think that market, as I said, is probably a little bit behind Tanzania in the economic cycle. And, you should remember that you can get exposure to some Kenyan shares, as Imani was saying earlier, companies that have businesses here in Tanzania as well. Jubilee Holdings is a big holding for my fund, is a company that we're big fans of. We own quite a significant chunk of that company. We bought it in Kenya, but it is available also here in Dar es Salaam. They were actually out with their results today. And it remains on a very reasonable valuation, even though the share price has doubled in sort of the last 12, 18 months. It's still on an earnings multiple of less than 4 times and sells for, well under half times book. So, there are still plenty of decent values around, and I don't think the market is overheated. That's my conclusion. In pockets it is, but as a whole, if you stick to the quality names where there are earnings backing price rises, then it's still very justifiable to allocate money in this market. If I turn to West Africa, which I follow reasonably closely as well, because I have quite a bit of money invested in Nigeria and Ghana. You have a different cycle there again. Nigeria was in a world of pain. They had a new president come in 2 years ago, and they floated the exchange rate. The exchange rate lost 65-70% of its value. Inflation was running at 25-30%. Man in the street was really doing it tough. Fuel prices also rocketed because of the removal of fuel subsidies. So they had some real economic shocks that they had to work through. But even the exchange there, as the data Imani presented earlier, it's rocketed in local currency terms. I mean, my fund has a Nigerian company that we bought. Unfortunately, we weren't able to buy nearly as much as we wanted to, but we've seen the price go up 10x. So we have a 10-bagger in Nigeria, which is quite extraordinary. We have another one that's gone from, it's a 5-bagger. It was above 100 recently. So that's a market that's even hotter than Tanzania and Kenya, quite frankly, from what I've observed this year. So it's healthy to see. I still don't think value by tailwinds, increasingly, greater retail investor interest, and also, I hope, greater foreign investor interest will come. So that's really not there yet. The foreign investors that I mingle with at conferences and so on, they're all still sort of licking their wounds from the 2014, 2015 tops. They are still in the markets, but they have not really deployed a lot of new capital. I spoke to one fund where I'm quite friendly with the principals, and they actually said, their fund this year is doing great. They actually do also North African markets, not just the sub-Saharan Africa. So Egypt, for example, has been doing well this year as well, and they have a fairly big allocation there. But they said even though their fund is up materially, 30% year to date, they've actually seen outflows from investors. So, if we get a wave of foreign investments coming in to these markets, including here in the years to come, which is what I expect, then it can get a lot hotter yet. So that's probably the way that I see things at the moment. I don't think there's any need to sort of be hitting the panic button and thinking that the party is getting too wild. It's still early days. That's my stance.
Two things I've noted. One, you have answered Ami's question that there's still value in this market. Ami, I hope you have taken note. So just put your funds warm.
You have to be selective, but there's value there.
So now that brings me to the before we there. I see there are questions in the comment section, but before we get there, that comment that you have to be selective. That brings me to my next question. What are the stocks in your radar right now? What is in your watch list?
And just to emphasize on what Imani has said, Tim, I've been in the market and I've heard of your name for so long. And if there was anyone who could, if there was any person who could mimic your trade over since 2020 and to date, I'm sure they will have a very, very, very good return. And it's unfortunate. I know that in some other markets there are people who are market watchers and they're trying to show the portfolio of some good investors and try to ensure that other people can mimic them. And I know that we are not there yet in Tanzania, but I'm also very curious to see what stocks are you looking at, and I'm sure most of our investors are also very curious to see what stocks is Tim really looking at in the market in Tanzania.
Tim, karibu. If you're talking, then maybe the hammer is causing some challenges. Yeah.
1 second.
Tim, you keep cutting off. We can't hear you. So I think Tim is facing some challenges. While we are waiting for Tim, there's a question I saw on the comment section from Dr. Elizabeth Mkoba. She said there's a slide explaining the effect of rule change, which entails the rule change has impacted negatively to those companies. So our questions are: 1, what is the rule change? 2, why it has affected those companies? And 3, what can be done to those companies versus rule change to have good performance? Please, let's go back to the slide that shows the difference in price, the difference in value, share value, that can change a price that I mentioned. And yeah, so there it is. So what we communicated here isn't that these companies were affected. It's that for the previous trading rules were that if a company, for DSE to consider change in price, so there was a limit of number of shares that should trade in a day to trigger the price to change. And the price, the closing price of a counter is the weighted average price for that particular day. But then if we have a weighted average price from very few shares, we don't consider that as market sentiment, because the closing prices should be considered as a market sentiment, that the market has agreed that this should be the closing price. And we should have a limit, a portion of that company trading that day to make sure that is considered market sentiment. So before the change in rules, that was 0.0025% of the total shares of a particular company. The rules, when the rules were changed, that was changed from 0.0025% of the total number of shares to only 100 shares. For all counters, it just changed to 100 shares. It doesn't matter the price, it doesn't matter anything, it's just 100 shares of that company. It doesn't matter how much shares that company has. So when that changed, we see, for instance, NMB has 500 million shares, and 0.0025% of its total shares were about 12,500 shares. 12,500 shares. Multiply that by the price at the end of May, you needed 78.75 million shillings to trigger a change in price at that particular day, at that particular trading session. When that changed to 100 shares, then you only needed 630,000 shillings to consider to trigger a change in prices for NMB. So this didn't negatively affect these companies. It just changed the volatility, the way that the prices can change. It just changed the weight needed to move so that the price can change. So and all of these counters have improved. Most of these counters have improved because of it. So TBL has gone down and has stabilized somewhere. TCC is still on its way down, but there's still value there, as Tim said. We just need to see the price go to an area that reflects maybe the market perception, or maybe the tangible or intrinsic value of TCC. We have seen CRDB increase. We have seen Voda drop and then start to increase again. We have seen TPCC, Trigger Cement, go up. We have seen Tanga go up, Swissport, and all these counters, other counters. So it's been mostly a positive impact from these counters. So I just wanted to make that clear. It's not a negative impact on the companies. It's just that the change in prices was improved from 0.0025% of the total share count to only 100 shares of that particular company, which significantly lowered the required amount for during a day, the required amount in a day for the shares for the prices to change. So that is clear. Tim, I don't know if you are back.
Imani, kama Tim anapata shida, if Tim is still having problems, I've seen some questions. I know Ibra has already responded to most of the question, but I just want to point out this thing, and I think also Tim's and you have also emphasized in it. I've seen Smart here asking the book value for DCB. I've seen Smart kauliza, hii share DCB imekuwa moved sana na demand ya market, na watu wanakimbilia sasa bei rahisi. Book value ya DCB ni ipi? Is it good share for long term investment au tuendelee kufanya speculation trading? Ibra kamjibu book value ya DCB ni 176 ambao inatrade at 1.7 time. Kama wewe unawekezaji muda mrefu unaweza kusubiria bei ishuke au faida ya benki zikue. Nimeona kuna wimbi sana la watu wengi wakitaka shares za banking sector zitrade around book value au zitrade chini ya book value, na nimeona posts za watu kadhaa wakizipunish bank zikikutrade above book value. Labda kwa kuelezea kirahisi kabisa kwa hali ilivyo, sijui Imani, sijui Ibro, unaonaje hili swala la issue ya book value versus the price of the bank? Mimi kwa uelewa wangu wa haraka kabisa naamini kabisa kwamba kama kampuni bado inaweza ikaleta earnings nzuri, book value inaweza ikawa sio sahihi sana kuvalue kampuni kwa book value, kwa sababu kuna uwezo wa outperform the book value ulionayo. Yaani leo naweza nikakupa ukawa na thamani ya 1000 lakini ukazalisha zaidi ya 1000. Ni kweli kabisa kwamba banking sector kuzalisha it's highly tied up to the capital ambayo inayo, na book value is more or less inaelezea capital inayo, lakini tumeona wimbi focus kubwa sana ya kuongeza non-funded income kwenye upande wa balance sheets kwenye P&L za benki. Tumeona pia move ya kutoa mikopo from corporate to retail side ambayo haircut zake pia ni ndogo kidogo, na hii tumeona kabisa kwamba hizo benki zimeweza kuongeza consistent return as teams haziweza kuongea kwamba kumekuwa na consistent growth kwenye bottom line year on year ya 20 to 30%. Sasa ukianza kumjudge mtu kwa book value, utasubiria aje reprice to book value, afu utashangaa hiyo opportunity ya kuingia unaikosa. Kwa hiyo I think badala ya kufocus sana na book value, focus on the opportunity about the banking sector inayo sasa hivi, lakini pia focus on the outlook. Where do you see these sectors going in the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? Hiyo ndio ingekuwa focus, kwa sababu is there a market for them to expand? Is there ability for them to increase their retained earnings? Na je, increase itakuwa na impact gani kwa wewe kama investor? Ukisubiria taasisi hiyo husika irudi kwenye book value ndio uwekeze, unaweza ukakuta hii boti ikakuacha mapema sana kabla haujawekeza katika hiyo taasisi husika. Kwa hiyo I thought that I should just clarify kwenye hili swala. I believe team kapata shida kidogo kujibu kwenye mtandao, tumempoteza, lakini kama atafanikiwa kurudi kabla hatujamaliza, naamini maswali mengi pia yameshajibiwa kwenye chat. Now, when you're answering Imani's question, if you still remember it, team, Happy from on the Q&A was also interested to know if she wants to be an investor of African Lions Fund. What are the requirements, or what should she do to be one of the investors in the African Lion Fund? So if you could hear me, I think that you could also respond to that question. Tim, warmly welcome.
Yes.
Imani, should you
Yes.
rephrase the question? Oh,
I remember.
Karibu.
Sorry for that. I can also repeat the question. Yeah, I don't know what happened. Maybe my kids started using their screens and hogging the connection. Who knows? But yeah, so in terms of what I see value in at the moment, obviously people here are probably most interested in the Tanzanian market. So I can disclose that we bought quite a lot of Tanzania brewery shares recently. We still see a lot of value there. And it goes back to what I said earlier, that, you know, the price has re-rated slightly from where block trades were taking place a year or two ago, but the earnings have, you know, really taken off as well. And the company paid out a lot of dividends. I think one of the features of the multinational subsidiaries here, including TCC, TBL, and the two cement companies, although you can set Tanga aside for the moment, the balance sheets are very strong, you know, net cash balance sheets. And I think the multinational parent companies realize that maybe they didn't need to be so conservative now that the economy has improved and, you know, there's credit is flowing and so on. So there was decisions taken. Twiga Cement also, if you recall, there was a very large dividend, 600 per share, although management has said not to expect that again. They said that quite clearly at the AGM this year. So there was an element of special dividends being paid by both TBL and Twiga Cement this year because of the balance sheet strength, allowing them to do so. But TBL definitely is one where we still see good value here in Tanzania. And also, if it adjusts down from the current level of 14,500 or wherever it's trading, TCC is another one that we would be buying, you know, in the high single 1,000. So anywhere from 8,000 to 9,000 for that stock looks pretty cheap to us. And then I alluded to, or I mentioned earlier, Jubilee Holdings, which we own in Kenya, but which you can also buy here locally. There is stock now trading occasionally on the DSE. That looks very good value as well from where we sit. The banks, I would say, are more, you know, they're close to fair value, and they would be holds in my mind rather than buys at these levels. So that gives you a flavor of how we're thinking about it. In terms of, you know, the fund that I run, it's really an international fund. It can take investors from all over the world. There's no barrier to any Tanzanian participating if they so wish. Of course, they will have to comply with you know, central bank foreign exchange rules, and our administrator will need to see you know, where your source of funds came from and so on. But I think you know, if you follow all the rules and regulations, it is possible to invest. And we have a website that's probably the best place to go and check out what the process is, and that's AfricanLionsPluralFund.com. If anyone's interested, you're more than welcome to go and look. I'm not, you know, I'm not pushing the fund. I'm just letting you know that it's there if anyone is interested, since you asked.
To shed light, is there a minimum amount of investment if someone wants to join the fund? I am curious.
It's not really a retail fund. The minimum is $25,000, which for a fund of this kind internationally is quite a low minimum. But it's still, it's a fairly large chunk of money. So that's the minimum.
Thanks a lot. Imani?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tim. I think majority of the questions that I personally had have been answered throughout the discussion, and throughout this conversation. You have answered Ami's question. Maybe one, if we say you just briefly give an advice to someone, as we mentioned, financial awareness is growing, and most people are just getting aware of the returns that are possible, maybe the opportunities that are available in capital markets and in equities particularly. So if you are to advise today someone who is just getting into stocks, just someone who wants to start investing right now when the prices are where they are, we have seen the market is at almost all-time high, what would be your advice to such a retail investor?
I would say, don't be scared off by that. I think one of the things that's unfortunate in our business is that most of the discussion is about price and index levels and, where we are relative to historical and charts and all this sort of stuff. That's important, but it's not nearly as important as the strength of the underlying businesses that the shares give you access to. So my advice would be to focus on the earnings of the businesses. Are they at record highs? Are they vulnerable to declines in future? And if the answer is no, then you can make a much better return if you buy cheaply, but you can still make a very good return in a stock where the company's earnings are set to keep growing, right? So a lot of people tend to make the mistake of focusing, almost exclusively on price. And, what did my stocks do today? Did they go up? Then you feel good and so on. I'll tell you a secret. I don't even look at that. I'm looking much longer term. I'm looking quarter to quarter. Did the company grow its earnings? If it did, I'm happy. I don't really care what the price did. Obviously, to make my investors money, I need the market to agree with me in the longer term. But history shows that tends to happen over long cycles. So for the initial years of running my fund here, 2021 was a good year because the whole world was coming out of the COVID panic and markets did well. 2022, 2023 were very tough because prices weren't moving. Nothing was happening. We still made money, but we made only single-digit returns. But because the companies that I had invested in were growing strongly, at that point led by NMB and Twiga Cement, as well as some companies in other countries, I still felt, that I was on the right track and I was confident and I was doing the right thing and my investors were going to make out well at the end of the day. So for someone starting out, focus less on price and try and focus more on earnings. That's my real advice to people.
Comment, and I think now investors are getting to learn about that. And so investors, as Tim said, focus more on earnings and not price. Usiangalie sana bei ya leo, angalia earnings ina grow, na hiyo growth is it sustainable. Kama it's sustainable inaendelea ku grow, Tim anakuambia kwamba in long term market tu yenyewe ita grow na hiyo price yenyewe itakaa vizuri. So just I've seen Dennis Rutinda's comment here, and I think it's very good to point it out. And just to note, I'll be giving only one question to Tim because we are almost out of time. Only one question, then we'll be ending our session. So while I'm reading this comment, anyone who has a question to Tim, you can raise your hand. We'll give chance only to one person. And that will be the first person to raise the hand. So Dennis Rutinda just said, good to have Tim on board today. I follow his trades closely. BBC strategy. Back to my personal opinion, the market is not overreacting, but rather price discovery. The market is being somewhat efficient in pricing. Investors are keen to uptake positive inflows on the counters and sending bullish waves. Based on performance of companies, look at Mkombozi. Soon after dividend announcement, the rest is history. Yeah, thanks a lot for your comment, Dennis. And I think as we all agree that we'll be giving out conclusions and as we are winding up, I also completely agree with Dennis. I don't think that the market is overheating. And by the way, I'm actually very pleased with how the market is right now. You can see the dividend from the time Nico announced the dividend to the price correction in the market. And this is what we are missing in our market. Back in the days, you could find that there's a message in the magazine. Then the price will start correcting maybe 2 weeks from the day that the announcement was there. Or sometimes it doesn't even correct at all. But with what we are seeing right now, even a simple message, we can see that the market is reacting. And with this kind of market, there is real opportunity of making money in one way or the other. I didn't see any hands, so I don't think I'll be inviting anyone else to join. I believe we've exhausted as much. And just to wind up, I believe that Ibra had already taken his stand on the way the market is. I've now taken my stand on where the market is. I think it's time for Imani and Ami to give closing remarks. But Tim, thanks a lot for your insightful, for all the insights you have been able to share today. And we really look forward to more positive engagement. I know that the market needs people like you right now in the market. So thanks a lot. Ami, muda wa conclusion, tuambie mbichi na mbivu ni zipi? Overreacting or repricing?
DCB unaionaje?
Well, what I would say, it depends on several counters. You look at the counters like Vodacom, you look at counters like TBL, TCC. What we are seeing is a repricing. Are we seeing overheating in some of the counters? On the mid-cap stocks, I would say, yeah. Why? Because more or less, some counters are merely just speculative. But on the blue chip companies, where we talk about the likes of NMB, Twiga, CRDB, Vodacom, TBL, TCC, I would say there is a lot of repricing and there is still value because the fundamentals, the economic fundamentals of the country itself are still strong, but also the sector-specific fundamentals of these particular companies within the space of these companies which are operating in are also quite healthy. But also company-specific fundamentals are still strong. And with a growing population, I think, and a new wave of investors coming in, I still believe there is money to be made. Also, there is business to be made for these companies. So that is my honest opinion. Overall, I think value is still there.
Ndugu investor, mtabidi mnisamee na Imani, naomba unisamee, lakini kama bosi wangu, lakini wewe na timu lazima ziko TBL. Any more comment? I think sasa hivi una furaha baada ya kuona timu ame second, your buy recommendation kwenye TBL. Any comment? Is the market overreacting or repricing?
Yeah, Tiko. Kwanza, we value hunters, CC value hunters, we see where the value is, and we have seen that. We saw that in Mkombozi. I remember the webinar in Mkombozi here was very insightful. We did the webinar for toll guesses. That was very insightful. And for value, long-term value, I was just at the AGM. We updated that in the last webinar last week about toll guesses. So even TBL, the price has moved from 10,900 to right now is trading at 7,600. I think, and it's about, as Tim said, it's just almost where the block transactions were moving, and the fundamentals of this company. So it's just, I think there's value there. But overall, if I look at the market, if we say the market has overheated or maybe it's a bubble or something like that, you need to, for anyone who is a finance enthusiast, they must have watched the Big Short movie. And in the Big Short, we see Dr. Barry, when he saw a bubble, he could point out exactly what would happen and the time frame when the bubble would burst. Exactly, he could point out that it was 3 years later since he saw that. So if we think the market is overheated, we think there's a correction coming. So if we think there's a correction coming, when would that happen? What would need to happen for that to happen? And however I look at that, I see we need an economic shock of some sort, because the way I look at the economy right now, the way the economy is moving, we see the financial sector is a dominant sector in our capital markets, in our stock market. and we see how the financial sector has been performing. It's been the best performing sector in the last 4-5 years. We see private sector credit growth growing at that double digits. The last report from the central bank says private sector credit growth from the banking sector grew at 16%. We see performance in the insurance sector growing by almost more than, I think it doubled it, almost 100% in the last 2-3 years. So we see the financial sector doing well. And if the financial sector is doing well, if the banking sector is giving out significant loans into the economy, it means there are other sectors that are benefiting from this investment. So it means that there's significant expansion of business going on. We have seen agriculture receiving the most credit growth in the last 5 years. We see manufacturing growing as well. We see transportation. We see significant investment in infrastructure. So if we look at all of these things, we see the economy performing well. So does that back the current rally in the market? We have seen a trigger point, which is the trading rules, which has unlocked something that was not there, as you said yourself, Lutiko. Something that was missing. Vodacom went from being profitable and dividend paying into loss making and back to profitability at the same price. Exactly same price. And that is 4 years apart. So there was something that was missing, and that has been unlocked from the trading rules change. I remember when the trading rules were announced, when the changes were announced, we did a webinar here, and we explained what we expect. I think this is a reflection, a retrospective view of what has happened and what we thought would happen. We said price determination mechanism would improve. We said liquidity would improve, and we have seen that with numbers now from this webinar and this session. We have seen that with numbers, that volume has gone up, bid offer ratio has gone up, the total turnover, the daily turnover average has gone up, which shows liquidity. The number, I think the ratio that we are missing is the turnover ratio. I believe we will look at that and maybe provide that in the report that we are going to share. So my view is that something has been unlocked, and value, given the fundamentals in the economy, and these companies that are operating in their specific sectors, I think there's still value. And if you invest in a long-term view, if you look at these companies, the values that you're investing right now, and maybe view it in 3 years later, do you still think that the prices have room to appreciate? I think yes. So I think there's still value there. The underlying fundamentals make sense. Yeah. So, just put your money warm, as I told Ami.
Yeah, put your money warm, investor. That's what Timani is saying. And I'll just second him in one way or the other. Right now there's real chance of making money, and we have seen and I'm actually looking forward to have more participations of investors coming into the market, because there's a real chance of making money. Ukiona bei ina move the way it's moving right now, kuna watu wanatengeneza hela hapo katikati. Na hawa watu wanatengeneza hela wanaenda kuambia wenzao, wao wenzao wanakuja. Unajua, kwa mfano kuna kipindi bond ilikuwa haieleweki. Baadaye watu walipoanza kuona zile returns za bond na ziko safe na wakaanza kuambiwa vizuri, tukaona wimbi kubwa la watu wakaenda kutengeneza wakaweka bond. Tukiangalia watu waliotengeneza hela wiki hii na ile movement ya bei ya CRDB wiki hii na bei ya Niko toka 1150 gap ikaruka 1270, toka 1300 sasa hivi tunaongelea 1800. You can see people are making money. Now once people are making money, uwezekano wa wengine kuja kutengeneza hizo hela unakuwa ni mkubwa. Na ndio kitu ambacho naambia kila siku kwamba guys, hiki tunachowaambia, this message, these webinars that we are doing, muinvite na mwenzako ili wote mweze kutengeneza hela. The more participants tunavyokuwa, the more ability ya kuifanya market iwe efficient inakuwa ni kubwa. And the more we can make money and price these securities right. Kwa hiyo I still see there's a chance of there's a very big room of making money. The fundamentals that support it. The market is doing well right now. The efficiency is there. It's coming up, and bado kuna room ya kuendelea kuongezeka. Na wewe kama investor, keep your money warm, as Imani said. Lakini pia hii information ambayo tunakupa usishare nawe mwenyewe. Share with your friends, share with your colleagues, share with your family. Make sure kwamba they are getting more and more knowledge. Knowledge is power. Whatever you are listening, the insights unapata kwa team, the insights unapata kwa Imani, the insights unapata from all members here, unazichukua na wenyewe unafanya analysis yako, then you make a very very right decision when you're investing into the market. And hii knowledge sasa isiishie kwako tu, na hao wenzako wakaribishe wapate hii knowledge. Tuko hapa kila Ijumaa kuanzia saa 12 mpaka saa 2 tukifanya webinars kama hizi, na lengo letu kubwa ni wewe kuelimika na wewe kuwekeza na wewe kuweza kutengeneza value out of the stock market that we have. Karibuni sana. Naona muda umeenda, lakini karibuni sana. Karibu sana. Naona Engineer Max hapa amesema hii session imerekodiwa. Ya session imerekodiwa, itakuwa shared na pia unaweza kuipata YouTube baadaye. I think Imani wants to welcome Tim for closing remarks, then we end the session. Imani.
Yeah, Tim, welcome for final remarks. Just a final word to investors who have been listening to you for about 90 minutes, I believe now. So just a final message, and then we wind up the session.
Thank you. Right. Sorry about the technical challenges. Yeah, you know, I would second what has been said about educating yourself, then coming into the market. There's no substitute for starting to actually do it and learning from experience until you build your confidence. You know, maybe you stay small, but there is money to be made. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. You know, this is not a get-rich-quick scheme, although that's something that a lot of people come into the markets to try and achieve. It's really a marathon. And over the long term, through the cycles, if you consistently deploy capital where valuations are attractive, you will compound your money and do very well in the long run. It's not easy psychologically to do that. But that's the real secret sauce. You know, you got to stay in the market a long time. You've got to add when prices are low, trim your positions when prices are high, and just stick in there. And then the money will compound and you will do very well in the long run. You know, someone like Warren Buffett, he's made more money in the last 20 years than he made in the first 70 years of his life. So, you know, it comes at the back end because of the rule of compounding. So for young people, just get started. Educate yourself, start with small amounts. You don't need a big amount to start. Get in there and build some wealth. The stock market is one of the best ways to do it.
For that, Tim, if you're still talking, we can't hear you.
No, I have stopped now.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the final word and that message. As investors, you know, as Tim said, just, you know, it's a marathon and not a sprint. Consistency is key. We have taken that, and I said at some point that I've noted two things in this session, Tim. One was that there's still value, but another, you mentioned that there's value in Kenya that people are overlooking, and we have really taken that, and I should promise investors here that we are looking into it. And we'll bring experts from Kenya. We will conduct a webinar, which will open up, as we have done. We have unlocked value for Tanzanian stocks that have value. Mid-cap stocks, we did a series, and we have seen the performance of mid-cap stocks here. And now, as we have heard from Value Hunter, who is investing across Africa, that there might be value that is overlooked in Kenya. So that as financial advisors and, you know, your investment partner, we have taken it upon ourselves to bring the Kenyan market and open it up to you and explore all the opportunities that we might find in Kenya. So in the near future, maybe next week or the week after, we are going to do a webinar here where we will look at Kenya. We'll bring a Kenyan player who will explain the Kenyan market in ABCs, in simple language. Then we can explore the opportunities that we see in Kenya. And, you know, after that, we'll find another market that has opportunity. Has opportunities, and then we'll open up for you guys. So apart from that, I see Burhan in the comment section saying tuliwaachia swali last week on portfolio. Swali kilopita la portfolio ilikuwa nasemaje?
Balance, bonds, equities, vipi.
Burhan, naomba hilo swali tuchukue kama kipolo tena, japokuwa na naomba nitue katika kipolo kwamba okay.
Sasa Burhan, umepata jibu? Kama jibu unalo, ukaribishe utuelezee briefly, very briefly. Kidogo tu. Very briefly, Burhan. Sababu swali tuliacha wenyewe, basi naomba kidogo tu. Twende kala. You can speak. The mic is enabled.
Okay, kwa mlisema na yield vipi portfolio on shares, government bonds au hizo corporate bonds. Kwa mimi actually mimi nilivyotengeneza hata portfolio yangu on yielding a portfolio kwenye hizi shares, government bonds, mixture of it, lazima uangalie vitu vile vya kwanza ambavyo, ya kwanza ni kuangalia investment goals yako wewe as a person, as an individual, na ya pili ni lazima udecide on allocation. Sasa ukidefine investment goals zako, sababu kuna mwingine anazingatia mapato, kuna mwingine anazingatia ukuaji, au kuna mwingine akawa on a mix ya both. So ukifanya hivyo lazima uta contemplate kwenye allocation yako ambao kwenye diversification yako. Ni hilo tu.
Asante sana Brian. Hapa tunaona kweli sasa session tunafanya na watu wanaenda wanafanya homework, wanaiva. Hayo ndio malengo. Tunalenga kuhakikisha the message is gotten out there and people take action. Kwa hiyo Brian, safi sana, hongera. I hope portfolio yako kweli inaendelea kuimprove hivyo kama ulivyoielezea. That being said, we should end here for today. Thank you so much, Tim, for showing up, and the message that you have said here is very important. What you have communicated, I'm sure the audience will be my guests in appreciating the knowledge that you have dropped in this session. It was very helpful for myself, for the team here, and I'm sure for a lot of investors across the audience. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys, for coming in the webinar this evening and for keeping on attending these webinars every Friday. We'll be here next Friday. As I said, potentially we'll be here with a Kenyan player to open up the Kenyan market. Hopefully it will also be an English session because, the Kenyan but Kenyan speaks Swahili. So we might have both languages as well. So thank you so much. Have a great weekend and a great evening. See you next week.
Thank you, Imani.